The subcommittee will come to order. Welcome to our second hearing of the fiscal year 2025 appropriations season. Today, I'd like to welcome the Acting Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Honorable Adrienne Todman, to this hearing on HUD's fiscal year 2025 budget request. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for appearing here today. Delighted to hear from you. We look forward to hearing from you today about HUD's request for the FY25 fiscal year and kicking off the current appropriations process. It is the fundamental job of this subcommittee to complete our work on time before the end of the fiscal year. I am confident that we can fulfill our task. I hope our colleagues who do not serve on this committee will be cooperative and help us meet this goal. Our job as appropriators is to carry out our nation's most fundamental duty of funding the government. This hearing is just the start of what we're called to do to make this government work for the American people. Today, we will hear testimony about the Department of Housing and Urban Development's budget request for $66 billion in discretionary budget authority in fiscal 25. HUD also uses mortgage guarantee fees from the Federal Housing Administration to offset its spending. The Office of Management and Budget currently estimates $6.7 billion in offsetting receipts for fiscal 25, an increase of $1.2 billion from the fiscal year 2024 receipts score. We must recognize the impact that the health of the housing market and FHA receipts have on this bill every year. In addition to discretionary funds, HUD also proposes over $81 billion in mandatory programs over 10 years. We are certain to face fiscal constraints in putting together our bill. This forces us to get back to the blocking and tackling of appropriations to make sure every dollar is well spent and purposeful. It lets us focus on funding the real needs of the government in a way that is sustainable, justifiable, and works for the long-term fiscal health of our great nation. HUD's programs impact every district, from providing rental vouchers to families, to helping first-time home buyers get a mortgage, to housing veterans who have served our country admirably. HUD programs allow elderly Americans to live with dignity in housing that meets their needs and keep people safe from hazards in their homes. Deciding how to best allocate funding to these important programs is our task and the task of our subcommittee. One of my priorities on this subcommittee is to stop the runaway housing inflation that impacts not only my constituents in Arkansas, but every American. We cannot turn a blind eye to families impacted by the rising housing costs, in part caused by choices made by this administration. I also want to focus today on out-of-control regulations that set up unnecessary bureaucratic barriers. Overregulation limits opportunities and it feeds inflation, often without making meaningful improvements in people's lives. I look forward to learning about HUD's successes and your long-term goals in this hearing. This subcommittee stands ready to work with you to better serve all Americans as we write the HUD Fiscal 25 Appropriations Bill. With that, I recognize my colleague and our ranking member and my good friend, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley, for his opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we said yesterday, for those who don't know it, the chairman and I were chairman rankers on FSGG, had a great partnership, and I want to echo his desire of what should be commonplace business here on the Hill of funding the government in a responsible, timely basis. Doing so after the fiscal year begins makes no sense. We need to show the world that we can govern. So, but I also want to welcome the Acting Secretary Todman before this subcommittee. It's great to have you here both as Acting Secretary of HUD and an experienced affordable housing practitioner. You have led one of the nation's largest housing authorities and have seen firsthand the challenges of addressing homelessness, preserving public housing, and creating housing opportunities for low-income families. I look forward to the very valuable and nuanced perspective your experience will bring to our conversation today. As you know, this nation faces significant challenges with housing affordability and homelessness. According to HUD's 2023 report on worst-case housing needs, Over 8.5 million of the lowest income households in the U.S. pay more than half their income for rent, live in severely inadequate conditions, or both. This is an increase of 760,000 households compared to the previous year. The solutions to these challenges are sometimes complex, but this subcommittee has risen to the occasion on a bipartisan basis each year to help HUD meet its mission to create affordable housing opportunities and strong, sustainable communities. In fiscal year 2024, we were able to prevent evictions for nearly 5 million low-income households, invest in programs that help mayors and governors fund locally driven solutions by expanding grants to reduce barriers to affordable housing production, and target $418 million more for homeless assistance grants to help over 750,000 people move out of homelessness and into permanent housing. While we have made important strides to address homelessness among veterans and families with children in particular, the fight to end homelessness is far from over. Data from HUD's most recent national count of people experiencing homelessness on a single night in 2023 showed a striking increase of 12% over 2022. This is the single largest one-year increase since HUD began collecting data in 2007, and it was reflected across subpopulations. While these numbers are sobering, they are not cause for hopelessness. When you talk to local leaders, they know what works. I hope we all feel the urgency of providing the resources and flexibility that localities need to support and house our most vulnerable communities. Without it, the impacts of this housing crisis can be felt beyond our housing systems. Hospitals, schools, and criminal justice systems all bear a huge burden. Secretary, I'm pleased that you have brought before us a budget that would continue our progress in addressing these complex challenges. I look forward to working with you and the chairman to come to a fiscal year 2025 agreement that adheres to the Fiscal Responsibility Act requirements without compromising our responsibility to ensure millions of Americans remain stably housed and receive the support they need to build a safe and thriving home. I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mike. The chairman of the overall Appropriations Committee, Mr. Tom Cole, who was the subcommittee chairman this time last year and wrote the 2024 bill, is preoccupied with disasters in his own state. My understanding is that Tom may be returning to Washington this week. We have a scheduled visit tomorrow, so he won't be able to be here. And any prepared remarks that Mr. Cole might have had, we will enter into the record, and without objection, so ordered. The chair notes that the gentlelady from Connecticut, the ranking member on the full committee, has graced us with her presence. And Ms. DeLauro, going to recognize you for your opening comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being late. I should know better that with the hearings that you would be conducting, that it's spot on. It's happening. It's going to start on time. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Quigley, for holding the hearing. And I thank you to Acting Secretary Todman. Welcome to the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee. Let me offer my congratulations to you on the position of Acting Secretary of HUD. Big, really undertaking, especially today, because the biggest issue that affects every single community across America is the lack of affordable housing. There's a shortage of nearly 8 million affordable homes available nationwide. Housing costs have skyrocketed, driving up the cost of living for American families and putting home ownership completely out of reach for many. And this is really home ownership, having a place to be, to call your own, is the American dream. It's the American dream, and people are suffering without being able to have access to affordable housing. And the lack of affordable housing has contributed to the escalation of the homelessness crisis. I spoke to mayors from across the country yesterday. They shared how rates of homelessness in their communities are spiraling out of control. Some 600,000 people in America, mothers, fathers, grandparents, children, experience homelessness on any given day. This is an issue consuming the everyday of our local leaders. What they said to me actually was, this is the thing that keeps them up at night, of how they're going to try to cope with. One mayor said he's got like 12 or 1,500 people, every night outside, just sleeping, and without any place to be. So it really is a critical issue. So high rent, low housing inventory are crippling their ability to respond. They need resources, including through increased support for housing choice vouchers and through project-based vouchers, which would allow for additional affordable housing development. There are many factors that contribute to homelessness in addition to housing affordability, but that we as a nation have yet failed to resolve this crisis, provide for the most basic of human needs to our most vulnerable populations, should bring us great shame, but at the same time, great urgency about doing something. The importance of providing more housing in places Americans live and work and ensuring that there are roofs over their heads of children and families should be a central focus of this Congress. And indeed, in the final 2024 funding package, we made investments to improve housing affordability and accessibility. We prevented the eviction of nearly 5 million low-income individuals and families and invested in legal aid assistance for eviction prevention grants. We provided historic increases for tribal housing and community development programs. We invested in programs that help mayors and governors find locally driven housing solutions. And the mayors yesterday told me they do have solutions, and they need to get a hearing on those solutions. And we expanded grants for reducing barriers to affordable housing production. And we expanded housing options for people experiencing homelessness by committing new resources to construction and rehabilitating permanent supportive housing. However, this is an incredible amount of work to be done. Longstanding inequities in housing persist, are exacerbated by the housing inventory shortage and elevated borrowing costs. It was just over 56 years ago that President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, of which the Fair Housing Act was included as Title VIII. Yet, the racial home ownership gap, the difference in home ownership rates between white and black Americans, is essentially unchanged to this day. And I would like to hear more about what the department is doing to address this historic inequity. Looking forward to 2025, the president's budget request for HUD proposes nearly $73 billion. We should support investments that would enable HUD to expand rental assistance for low-income households, increase the affordable housing supply, expand home ownership opportunities for underserved borrowers, advance efforts to end homelessness, address housing-related discrimination, increase climate resilience and energy efficiency, and strengthen communities suffering from underinvestment. Bringing down the high cost of living for American families has got to be our primary focus. People struggle every day. They live paycheck to paycheck. Housing is one of the primary drivers of the inflation suffocating families' budgets and holding back our economy. I believe that your department and this subcommittee must assume a leading role in tackling these issues. Thanks so much for being here, for your public service to our country. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentlelady. Secretary Todman, you hit the lottery today. You are appearing before, and I know I'm biased, the best subcommittee on the House Appropriations Committee. The gentlemen and ladies that sit to my right and my left are genuinely interested in addressing the issues that fall under our portfolio, HUD, of course, being one of those. So we're anxious to hear your comments today. I think you will find that the Q&A that we will do following your remarks will be beneficial not only to you but to this subcommittee as we continue to press against the challenges facing this great nation of ours. And with that, I'll give you 5 minutes for your opening comments.
Thank you. Chairman Womack, Ranking Member Quigley, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the President's FY25 budget proposal for HUD. And thank you and your staff for supporting HUD's mission as reflected in our 2024 budget. I know that you had tough choices to make, and we are looking forward to working with you in the implementation of those funds. HUD has been hard at work getting resources out the door. We have stood up 2 new programs, YIMBY and Price, to modernize how and where we build housing. There were more apartments under construction in 2023 than in any year on record, and we are helping to build even more. We've provided more new rental vouchers to Americans across the country, the largest increase in 20 years. We've helped almost 20 million families buy their first home. Last year alone, HUD allocated more than $340 million to help eliminate health hazards like lead in American homes. And we continue to prevent and remedy the impacts of discrimination. And we are making investments in HUD's workforce and technology to ensure that we can support communities who need us now more than ever. This past Monday, I also had an opportunity to meet with 40 or so mayors. There were Democrats, Republicans, representing big cities, the suburbs, and small towns who acknowledged the support that they've received from HUD and the Biden-Harris administration. But they also shared what they're hearing from their constituents, the need for more rental assistance, access to homeownership, and helping the homeless, particularly our homeless veterans. I also heard from your colleagues on the Senate side as well about the housing needs that exist in their respective states. So we at HUD know our work is simply not done. That's why the president's budget proposes bold mandatory investments focused on increasing the nation's housing supply, helping first-time homeowners by providing $10 billion in first-generation down payment assistance, $15 billion to support additional apartments that low-income families can afford and to make repairs to public housing, $33 billion to prevent and address homelessness, particularly for veterans, our seniors, and youth aging out of foster care. Together, this suite of funding and other tax proposals aim to tackle housing affordability head-on. The budget proposal also requests $72.6 billion for HUD, nearly $363 million more than the 24 enacted. And it's to support our core programs and our housing delivery systems, our public and assisted housing, the home program, CDBG, our housing choice vouchers, our healthy home programs to prevent evictions and address homelessness with the urgency it requires, and certainly initiatives to boost homeownership and other wealth-building opportunities. Our proposal also, once again, calls on Congress to support communities devastated by disasters by authorizing HUD's disaster recovery program. Whether it's hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, or flooding, HUD needs to be better positioned to aid communities much faster than we are right now, and we cannot do that without Congress's help. Senators, creating and sustaining strong communities and providing Congresspeople, creating and sustaining strong communities and providing access to affordable housing are priorities for the Biden-Harris administration. And the president has put forward a vision that builds on our existing body of work. And HUD is certainly prepared to do our part. Chairman, ranking member, distinguished members of this subcommittee, thank you again for this opportunity. I will also agree, Chairman, that this is the best and hardest working subcommittee here in the House of Representatives, and I look forward to working with you on behalf of the American people and their credible housing needs. Thank you so much.
And we thank you. Each member will have 5 minutes. We'll adhere to the 5-minute rule. Your light will turn yellow when there's a minute remaining, so heed the warnings as recognized by the lights. Members will be recognized in order of seniority based on who was seated at the beginning of the hearing this morning. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Let me kick off this hearing by saying that our thoughts are with our colleagues whose districts were devastated by tornadoes this past weekend. I'm especially thinking about my friend and our full committee chairman, Tom Cole, who this week is viewing the devastation on the ground in hard-hit communities he represents. We send our prayers to the injured and join those who are mourning the lives lost. Acting Secretary Todman, do I have your commitment that HUD will work diligently and quickly with communities on the ground to rebuild as soon as possible?
You certainly do.
Thank you. As you well know, the Appropriations Committee appropriates the funding for the CDBG disaster recovery, that's the CDBG DR program. Can you remind the subcommittee on the DR process and steps HUD has taken to ensure that funds appropriated to communities are quickly dispersed?
Certainly. Well, as I mentioned in my opening comments, Chairman, we certainly do need Congress's help to not just authorize the program, but also to provide us with those disaster recovery funds. I yet to receive some of the funding that we need to take care of our storms that happened in 2023. And certainly look forward to working with this subcommittee and others to get that across the line. Having said that, one of the things that we did do very recently was reach out to all of the existing disaster recovery grantees, those states and big towns that's received our funding, but also the general public to say, how can we do this better? We know that we're not perfect. We know that this is meeting families and communities their most traumatic time. Received a lot of information, and we'll be putting that to work to make sure we are streamlining the program.
There are probably people on this dais that are maybe a bit confused as to the difference between CDBG-DR and what would normally happen in a disaster with FEMA, SBA, and others involved. Can you delineate the differences between what the responding agencies on these disasters do and then where the CDBG-DR program fits in?
Certainly. So FEMA is certainly the federal government's first responder. They're usually the first boots on the ground, and they help to stabilize communities just in the immediate and short term. And SBA also helps by providing businesses and homeowners with resources they need quickly to try to get back on their feet. What HUD does, and I say this across the country, is HUD is there when the headlines are gone. You know, sadly, we have so many disasters and so frequently that we forget sometimes some of the Americans who are impacted. HUD's work is to be there to rebuild and reknit the communities in the long term. I've been to Florida after Ian. I've been to Kentucky after the tornadoes that happened there, met with the local leaders and people. So HUD is there to help rebuild homes in the long term and to build resiliency into anything our funds touch so that we can try to prepare for what inevitably may be the next disaster.
I'm not going to ask you to wade into the issues regarding the permanent authorization of CDBG-DR. That's a fight that Congress will need to take up if, in fact, it's going to happen. We appreciate your response on the disaster recovery piece. My last question in this round is one of my priorities is making sure that HUD VA supportive housing program, HUD-VASH, is working well, and veterans can access and use the HUD-VASH rental assistance vouchers quickly. Out of the 110,000 vouchers awarded in the HUD-VASH program, why are nearly 30,000 vouchers still waiting to be leased up according to HUD's latest dashboard?
Yeah. You know, we do find that sometimes we have been, it's been difficult for veterans to sometimes use these vouchers in the private rental market. And so we've been working very carefully with housing agencies on ways that we can improve the program and also improve some of the business aspects of our relationship with private landlords.
Any early indications what those changes, what those modifications might be?
We're certainly looking at issues around inspections. We're looking at issues around getting eligibility documents done quickly. But one of the other things that we're doing is working with our partners at Veterans Affairs to make sure that we are receiving referrals, or the agencies are receiving referrals very quickly. And both agencies are working very closely with each other on the ground to make sure veterans are housed. Secretary McDonough and I, just probably 3 weeks ago, kicked off a VA and HUD boot camp to help housers and the VA Medical Center leaders figure out how to work more seamlessly with each other.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Chairman. Madam Secretary, I'm going to dovetail on the Chairman's questions with CDBGR. I think, put it in a broader perspective, our thoughts are with the full committee chairman and the sites he is visiting, the people who have suffered. But we recognize that the number and severity of storms and fires and other natural disasters have increased. And we have to be honest with ourselves and recognize that we can't just build the same old infrastructure back at it. We have to build it with resilience and recognize what the long-term needs are. But it's been nearly, what, a year and a half since Congress has helped communities with long-term disaster funding through CDBGR. So I guess the first question is, what do you see as the current unmet need at this point, and what is probably going to be our annual need as we go forward so we can appropriately plan and budget?
Yeah. So I know that we have sent over to the Congress sort of our DR funds need for the 2023 storms, and I believe that's like $3.2 billion. $3.2 billion is the existing need.
Can you pull your microphone a little
Certainly.
closer?
I'll get a little closer. $3.2 billion is our existing need based on the storms that occurred in 2023. That doesn't include any storms that's occurred so far this year and probably at the tail end of last year.
Okay. Please keep us informed on that. And I appreciate that you referenced homelessness in your opening. You've watched this for some time and currently have a good perch to see how we are doing as it relates to this. But in the communities that seem to be succeeding at least reducing homelessness, or it's not an increase, and particularly unsheltered homelessness, what seems to be working? What programs and ideas?
What I see works is a high level of outcome-based coordination between the housing system, the homeless system, and really the political leadership in towns and counties across the country. And when that seamlessness occurs, when everybody agrees on what their true north is, I think that we do see a fair amount of work occurring. But notwithstanding that intentionality, folks need resources. I mean, people continue to tell me the need for more vouchers, the need for more funds that were given to our continuums of care. So we know the need is great, as evidenced in our point-in-time count report from last December. But with resources and intentionality, we think that that is the way to help Americans.
You talk about coordination, seemingly local, but how is HUD, and are they coordinating with other federal agencies to provide supportive services to maximize our investments in improve homeless intervention outcomes?
Yeah. So we actually kicked off a new pilot with our partners over at HHS to do just that, to match our housing and their services. We call it a housing and services accelerator. And Secretary Becerra and I kicked that off, I want to say, just about a month ago. It is a pilot that's targeted 8 states that have their Medicaid waivers. And the idea is to use some of HHS's funding for not just services that are happening at sites and elsewhere, but also for some of those very modest upfront costs that our most vulnerable families have, whether it is helping to clean up an apartment before they get in there, or something tied to their rental fee. So we're trying to marry our programs and HHS's services dollars to try to make sure we're helping families who are the most vulnerable.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
As a matter of personal privilege, I'm going to recognize Mr. Joyce, who has important matters before the United States Supreme Court from his position as chairman of the Financial Services and General Government Subcommittee. And I'll recognize Mr. Joyce for 5 minutes so that he can depart early and
I object to.
go set the SCOTUS, so he can go set the SCOTUS straight, okay? Mr. Joyce.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to do as best I can to follow in your footsteps and lead this committee. Acting Secretary, welcome.
Thank you.
I know you have big shoes to fill. My dear friend Marcia Fudge was there before you, and in honor of her, I'm going to ask you a question that about an issue that she brought really to my attention, and that is the use of lead-based paint. And it was banned in 1978, but its harmful legacy continues in Ohio, especially in Cleveland, the area she represented so ably over the years. Across the United States, it's also an issue, but 65% of Ohio housing was built prior to 1978, and therefore lead paint is a bigger issue. Even at very low levels, lead exposure damages a child's brain and nervous system, potentially resulting in slowed growth and development, learning behavioral problems, and hearing and speech issues. While it's critical to reduce the exposure to these, existing programs that you have addressed the lead in homes obviously to try to prevent some of this. Given the urgency to rid homes of hazards such as lead, what should we be telling our local communities about resources that they can access through the department to reduce child exposure to toxic metals and eliminate these hazards in their homes?
Thank you, Congressman. And yes, removal of lead hazards was something really important to Secretary Fudge, and I share that in her values. You're absolutely right. We need to do everything we can to remove these hazards from homes, particularly given what they do to impact our babies. And we are very fortunate to have a robust program that helps not just housing agencies, but mayors and county executives and nonprofits do that work. I will say that I do think we can probably do a better job making sure that folks are aware of these resources and teach them how to access it. And that's going to be something that I take on while I'm in this seat, and look forward to working with you on some of those ideas.
I'm sure we'd all look forward to working with you to help advocate for that in our communities and to
Absolutely.
our constituents. Can you talk about the innovative public-private funds that offer new and more flexible gap financing that could increase the pace at which these local communities can eliminate the public health threat and complement existing efforts?
No, absolutely. So, almost everything that HUD does requires the public and private sector working with each other. We know that our health hazard funds are sometimes matched with funds that are with nonprofits and other private sector partners on the ground. We know that we need to do more of that. We know that we have businesses who are very interested in making sure that we're moving lead hazards in and around their communities as well. And so I think that there's more work to do there.
What aspects of your FY25 request will help improve the rate at which the department can assist communities in eliminating these home-based hazards?
Right. Well, certainly, the budget reflects some of the constraints placed by the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and so we're trying to be responsible stewards and follow that law. But certainly, we prioritize this, and we do have a robust number in there to carry out the work of our health hazards program. It's lead, it's mold, it's radon, it's all the things that we know are hurting our families, and we certainly look forward to working with the subcommittee on what our final number looks like.
Thank you very much. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman. Are you back?
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. And now I'm going to recognize one of my Democrat friends, and you guys may want to arm wrestle over it. And I don't know, Ms. Torres, do you need to? You got 30 minutes? Ms. Watson-Coleman, do you want to?
Am I one of your Democratic friends?
I
Let
hope
me
so.
sure as I embark on this.
We'll find out when we'll find out when we get to full committee markup. Yes, thank you. Ms. Watson-Coleman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to you, Madam Acting Secretary. You have very big shoes to fill, but I've looked at your bio and you can certainly fill them
Thank you, ma'am.
because of the work that you've done. I want to talk to you a little bit about the current litigation before the Supreme Court, debating on whether or not homelessness and potentially setting a precedent that would criminalize homelessness, which is unheard of in my mind. No one wants to be homeless if they have an option. How will HUD use funds proposed in the budget to combat this? Additionally, what can Congress do to promote the use of sound evidence-based approaches to resolving homelessness and which don't involve further victimizing people who are experiencing it?
Well, thank you for that. Well, I will start by saying homelessness is not a crime. And what HUD can do is to prevent and eliminate homelessness altogether. It's one of the reasons why when we looked at what we prioritized, what the president prioritized in this budget, we tried to make sure that that piece of our work receive the amount of funds that we need to meet this moment, notwithstanding the constraints of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. But we also have an obligation to work with our partners on the ground who are on the front lines carrying out this work, our continuums of care, our housing agencies, to make sure that they're working as swiftly as they can as well in providing technical assistance. So we understand the need. We think HUD's role is to make sure people are using our funds in a very intentional way, but also doing what we can working with other federal partners to prevent homelessness to begin with.
I want to ask you about the using of your funds, because when I look at all the requests and the money that you have at your disposal, it looks like a lot. Now, I don't know if it's enough, because we have such a massive issue with home ownership, home rental, in all kinds of populations and things of that nature. But has HUD found bottlenecks? Bottlenecks that interfere or delay the money that you have allocated to certain issues getting kind of caught up in systems? If so, like, where do you find that most prominently, and what is it that you think you can do about it? What is it that you think we need to do about it?
Thank you for that. So I will say at the onset that we don't have enough resources. The country, not just HUD, doesn't have enough resources.
I believe that.
1 in 4 eligible people for our vouchers receive a voucher, just 1 in 4. So that means that there are 3 of the 4 families out there who are needing our help, who are either homeless or at risk of being homeless because they're just on the edge. So certainly we don't have the resources that we need, which is why the president in each one of our 3 budget has proposed more vouchers.
Okay, with that in mind, I agree with you. Do you find bottlenecks?
Certainly.
And where are they?
Yeah, the bottlenecks in using our vouchers stems in some of the rules that HUD has to follow. Landlords will complain about the length of inspections. So landlords will complain about making sure that just working with the government is sometimes slow. So we've created some flexibilities over the past couple of years to give housing agencies tools that they can use to work more quickly and to provide incentives to work with landlords. I think that connection is probably the biggest bottleneck we have in the use of our rental assistance.
So is our biggest problem a lack of housing, the variety of housing that we need? Is our problem investors who buy up housing and create, this more expensive, unaffordable? Is it discrimination? What is it altogether?
Yeah, I would have to say if there's one thing, is that as a country, as a whole, we have not kept up with the demand for housing, whether you're in big cities or small towns, and that's a fact. Since 2008, 2009, we just have not built at the pace that we need, and we need approximately 2 to 3 million more housing units. And so if there was one thing I would say, if we did that one thing, I think it'd make an impact. It is that, because by doing that, not only are we providing units for people to live in, but we're also helping to reduce the overall costs by increasing the supply that can meet the demand that we have.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Gonzalez?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Acting Secretary, for being here. I have the privilege of representing San Antonio, 7th largest city in the country, predominantly Hispanic community. I would love to work with you on housing and some other issues. Would you be willing to take a trip to San Antonio? I'd love to host you at your convenience.
Absolutely, happy to do that.
Fantastic. What you'll find is Texas is like a country of its own, and we are used to kind of going about it our own way. But it shouldn't be that way, In many cases, at the local level, housing is very much an issue. But if you talk to the people of San Antonio, it's the local city council and it's the local mayor that are feeling as if they're carrying a larger share of the need and the want. And I think there's an opportunity here. Over the last decade, the overall poverty rate in San Antonio has relatively stayed the same at 18%. There's over 110,000 families on the public housing waiting list. Another 1,000 families get added to it each month. So the demand is absolutely there. The city is growing at an incredible rate. Opportunity Homes San Antonio, which is the local housing authority in San Antonio, needs well over $500 million to address capital maintenance issues across their properties. I used one of my community projects to help with this, but that's a couple $1,000,000. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the need. Like many public housing authorities across the country, Opportunity Homes must utilize other funding streams to provide affordable housing, including local taxpayer funds. Given the federal government's role in providing public housing maintenance, are there any opportunities for additional funding or incentives to cities that use local funds to preserve and create new public housing?
Right. Thank you for that. And I look forward to my trip to San Antonio with you. You know, one of the things that HUD has used over the past several years to help housing agencies with their capital needs is the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. We call it RAD. And it has been very successful. And agencies have been able to use that and leverage their assets to be able to raise funds to make repairs. And so we see that happening all over the country, including San Antonio. New kitchens, new bathrooms, things that are really meaningful to residents.
That's fantastic. And I'd love to drill down more on this program and others at work. I visited one of the housing facilities on the west side of San Antonio, and you had families drying their clothes outdoors on a clothes hanger, like it was, 100 years ago. And it's just not right in so many cases. And I get the demand for cost and you're always struggling for dollars, but I just would love to find a way on how we can deliver so that way these families can live in a very dignified way. And like you said, a new washer and dryer, that is a game changer for many of these families. My next question, we're in a housing crisis in San Antonio. There's just simply not enough houses to go around. Because of this, realty experts have said that newly built homes are imperative to keeping up with the growing demand. With thousands of people relocating to San Antonio, this has been a significant concern to local realtors. What efforts are underway to help increase the overall supply of housing in the Texas area?
Sure. Over the past couple years, HUD has worked with the other agencies in the federal government on a overall housing supply action plan. And while we've proposed dollars that we think are needed to resource that plan, we've also used our existing administrative authorities to do things. One example of that is the federal financing band risk sharing program that we have with Treasury, which has provided really necessary gap financing for developers through the housing finance agencies to kind of get that work done. We were able to extend the deadline and make that initiative permanent. And so we're hoping to have much more housing built with that particular program, which is just using the authorities that HUD and the Treasury Department has.
Excellent. And that's all the questions I have. I look forward to working with you and your team, and I look forward to hosting you in San Antonio. With that, Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Tony. Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Chairman, and I know I'm your friend, so because we serve on two committees together. Welcome to our committee. We're so excited to have you here and weigh in on some of our questions regarding housing affordability. When it comes to transportation and housing, low-wage earners are, at the very, very low end. They're paying the highest in public transportation, and the highest, up to 50% of their income goes for public transportation. So housing is incredibly important. Those vouchers are incredibly important. In fiscal year 23-24, the funding bill provided funding for nonprofits under HUD EDI program as community projects. I've invested many of my community projects in affordable housing for low-wage workers in my district. Unfortunately, this year, nonprofit organizations will no longer qualify for those projects. We have housing availability and options for ag workers, but for warehouse workers that I represent, there's really nothing that has been cut out for them. Organizations like the House of Ruth, which is a domestic violence shelter, the National Corps, which is a national award-winning nonprofit organization, that builds affordable housing, will no longer be able to qualify for this funding. Do you have any thoughts and ideas on how you can help them build up the housing stock that communities like mine desperately need?
Right. Right. In the face of HUD not being able to provide any of the community project funding to
No, but specifically to nonprofits.
to nonprofits. Certainly, nonprofits are qualified sub-grantees to our all the other funds that we have. Our CDBG funds come to mind. In fact, many nonprofits across the country are deploying our dollars as we speak. There's very limited other opportunities that HUD has to provide nonprofits with direct access to our funds. So it would basically be sort of as a sub-grantee.
Okay, I like to work with you on that issue, on how we can expand some options and opportunities for them to continue to serve our communities. On another issue, veterans across the country are sometimes forced to choose between their disability benefits and housing vouchers. HUD-VASH vouchers. Currently, HUD rules count veterans' federal disability stipends as income, which combined with Social Security can put them above the qualifying level. Restrictive, income limits imposed on these low-income housing tax credit is another obstacle for them. Do you plan on revisiting the HUD definition of annual income to exclude VASH vouchers specifically to deal with this issue, to address this issue for veterans?
This issue came to our attention several months ago, and we've been working very closely with our partners at Veterans Affairs to just figure out what was going on and how folks were with some of the highest needs, some of our veterans with our highest needs, not being able to access our housing. And so we've been working closely with Treasury. One of the things that we will be doing is increasing the eligibility limit so that more veterans can access our VASH vouching. So vouchers, what that means is that by increasing it from 50% to 80%, we understand we're able to assist 97% of all homeless veterans across the country. So we think that's a good start.
Okay, but their disability payments will still get in the way.
That includes their that
includes-
80% would include their vets benefits. It would be included in their definition of income. So when we take our bar and raise it to 80, we'll take care of 97% of the homeless veterans in the country. And working with our partners at Treasury, we're helping them figure out how to work with their programs as well.
Great. We'll check in with Treasury
Very good.
also, and I look forward to working with you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Norma. Mr. Valadale?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your time today. I want to make you aware of a unique challenge we're facing in California, where we have a conflict between HUD and IRS regulations. Given the state's affordability challenges, we're starting to see more developers leverage HUD programs with the low-income housing tax credit to build new affordable housing. However, HUD's methodology for calculating utility allowances is out of date. The IRS in California can calculate utilities building by building, while HUD is still using area-wide estimates that don't consider the energy efficiency of new construction. I never thought I'd say this, but California is doing something positive and market-driven when it comes to affordable housing. And currently, California is forced to use HUD's outdated methodology, and we're overspending on utilities. This is money that could go towards constructing badly needed housing. This seems like a simple fix, and I want to ask you if HUD has any plans to update its methodology to allow states like California to calculate utility allowances and utilize the tax credit more accurately.
I'm just hearing of this for the first time, Congressman, so I'll commit to figuring out what's going on and look back at my team who's busy taking notes, and we will get back to you on how we can address that.
I appreciate that. It's something that seems pretty reasonable, and I figured you'd be open-minded on this one, wanting to work with us. Because
Happy to
it
work
is-
with you.
California, we really do struggle in some of our housing issues there across the state, even in our rural communities. Since 2014, the federal government has issued nearly $20 billion in awards to communities in homeless assistance, an increase of 53%. Chronic homelessness over the same period increased 56%, and unsheltered homelessness increased 30%, affecting more than 380,000 in both groups last year. In fact, 58% of those counted as homeless in the point-in-time count last year were chronic and unsheltered. How does HUD justify increasing awards year after year when it's clear by your own data that more and more people are experiencing chronic and unsheltered homelessness over the life of the program?
I will tell you, we were taken back by what the point-in-time count in January of 2023 showed us in terms of the needs across the country. Since that time, January of 2023, we've deployed a number of funding provided to us by this subcommittee to make sure that we were helping folks on the front lines deal with that 12% increase. We have sent funds to areas to help with encampments. We've sent funds to help with our young homeless individuals. But let me say this, when we took a deep look in the data of that 12% increase, what we found was that many of the individuals were first-time homeless, that we believe were being assisted by the very robust social safety net that was created during the pandemic to make sure folks were not deemed homeless. And then when those different programs began to expire is when we saw an uptick. So we know that there's an issue. We've deployed some additional funds, and the 25 budget, as best we can with the constraints around us, has proposed funding to continue to help localities.
All right. And then continuum of care. California receives the highest amount of federal funds of any continuum of care across the country. Last year, HUD provided more than $525 million to California for this program. Unfortunately, these awards have failed to reduce the number of people experiencing homelessness. Focusing on the chronic and unsheltered populations over the last 10 years, chronic homelessness has increased 260% and unsheltered 132%. When HUD sees these large awards going out year after year to specific continuum of care and sees the constant increase in homelessness in populations year after year, what intervention or assistance does HUD provide? How does it ensure that taxpayer resources are not going to ineffective programs and are not mismanaged by incompetent leadership and are driving positive metrics? What is HUD's plan for improvement in the state with the highest unsheltered population in the nation?
Yeah. So we know that the state and local leadership at California are doing lots of things and using our funds to address the homelessness crisis there. HUD does not provide its funds willy-nilly to our continuums of care. We actually have a competition. That competition is now on a 2-year basis. But the idea is that to just prevent exactly what you're talking about. If we have a stable, well-performing continuum of care, they will continue to receive the funds that we have. When we don't, they don't. And so we are keeping an eye on that. And we're also providing technical assistance where necessary, given the magnitude of the issue.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you.
And now the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. DeLauro. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize again. It's a hearing hopping here today, but just a quick thought. It may be, and Mr. Chairman and ranking member, as I said, I talked to a number of mayors yesterday, and I know you, Madam Secretary, you did as well. They talked about that there are several successful examples or projects, models that are dealing with the issue of homelessness. It may be worthwhile to bring those folks in to listen to this because it is such a pervasive issue nationwide, and to bring it more to the attention of our colleagues and what are the kinds of things. And then it also, I think, helps us in terms of what are the kinds of projects we should be funding, what initiatives would make sense. Anyway, let me, I reached out to my public housing authorities in my district. And this first question comes from someone you know, Karen Du Bois Walton. She's from Elm City's community in New Haven. And the second question comes from Jared Hayon of the Ansonia Public Housing Authority. We see a significant number of housing vouchers expiring due to a lack of units for individuals and families to rent. HUD exercised more flexibility to get people housed during the pandemic, and you made that point. Beyond significant investments in creating more affordable units, how is HUD thinking in the short term and long term to address low voucher utilization through greater flexibilities for subsidies, expediting lease-up changes to the fair market rate calculations, streamlining recertifications or other means?
No, thank you. And Karen is a tremendous leader and one of the
she
best
is.
houses in the country by far. Let me say this, we have learned through two different streams of work, both the flexibilities provided during the pandemic, but also the flexibilities provided to moving to work agencies in terms of ways to streamline their programs so we're focused on outcomes and not just paperwork. And through both of those streams, we know some of the flexibilities that have worked. Some of them we've already put into place, like a more expansive use of our administrative fee to really incentivize landlords. But I know there's more that we can do. And so there's an internal working group at HUD as we speak talking about what are things that we can do inside of HUD's authorities so that we can carry on some of the flexibilities that you mentioned. But additionally, our legislative proposals also has embedded in them some of the things that we think can work that we don't have the authority to implement, and we need some statutory guidance from Congress. So we know that there's more streamlining we can do. The voucher program should be made much more streamlined than it is right now, and I'm committed to doing that.
Thank you. The Ansonia Housing Authority, smaller public housing authority, they want to expand their programs and services, especially for seniors. They don't have the income to sustain their homes, but lack affordable housing options. These are people who have lived in what is known as the Naugatuck Valley in Connecticut. Discuss how HUD might help public housing authority like the one in Ansonia address the housing and supportive services needs of seniors. One idea that was raised in particular is the development of scattered site properties tied to project-based vouchers.
So certainly we are, a big proponent of, project-based vouchers because it creates stability where if there's a senior with a voucher who can't find a unit, it's probably really traumatizing to not be able to find someplace secure. What project basing does, it provides stability on one site, and then we can invite service providers to that site. Meals on Wheels comes to mind. I know a lot of senior buildings have Meals on Wheels, wildly successful partnership. But in addition to that, HUD does have our resident services dollars that go to housing authorities that can help support these kind of programs. And there's lots of models where housing agencies are working with local nonprofits and their local human services as well. So we can certainly make sure that those models, particularly models that are working for smaller agencies that may not have some of the bandwidth to create those partnerships, we can make sure that we are providing those models that I think can be replicated.
I'm down to 16 seconds. Will there be another round, Mr. Chairman? Or can I just ask my last question?
There'll be another round, but if you've got another question,
just-
you're the ranking member of the
Well,
full
I know,
committee.
but I don't want to abuse my colleagues here. Very, very quickly. Cities today are restricted from using more than 15% of their community development block grants, those dollars on services. The cap prevents cities from spending more dollars on supportive services and emergency assistance like rent and utilities to keep people housed. Is HUD exploring measures to either increase or waive CDBG's cap on public services?
I think that that is certainly one thing that we can look to, and I know that we're interested in any and all ideas to use these resources, these valuable resources, to achieve better outcomes. So happy to sit with you on some of the ideas that you're hearing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're most welcome. We'll take that 45 seconds off Pete Aguilar's time. Just kidding, Pete. Just kidding. Sheriff, Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary,
Yes.
great to see you, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Listen, I met with the Northeast Florida Apartment Managers Association, a very large group, last week. They brought up an issue that I don't know if your apartment or your department is aware of. If you are, I'd like to know what you can do about this issue. If not, I'd ask if you could look into it. It's a little confusing, so follow me. They're running into a problem where they can't confirm a voucher holders. This is on the Section 8 voucher issue, going back to actually some of the bottlenecks that my colleague was talking about earlier. They're running into this problem where they can't confirm the voucher holder's ability to pay rent because the Public Housing Authority will not confirm how much the housing voucher will cover until there's an agreement in place with the landlord. However, the landlord, this is like a chicken and egg thing. However, the landlord or property manager may not be able to make that agreement until they know the prospective tenant's ability to pay, which is partially based on that voucher. So sometimes these voucher holders are not able to rent these apartments because they may not meet the income requirement without the voucher being counted in. Have you run into this anywhere else?
It looks like we have a sequencing issue a little bit, or maybe a process issue that most other agencies are able to overcome. So I'm intrigued by what you said, and would ask the team to follow up with your staff to see exactly what's going on, because this is a process that generally works every day in terms of what the tenant will pay, what the housing authority will pay to get to 100% of the rent.
If the voucher's not counted in their ability to pay, then they may not be able to rent that apartment. So
I understand.
I look forward to working with your staff on that.
Okay.
I really appreciate that that offer. I want to bring up multifamily housing, the multifamily housing complaint process. As I said, I'm from Jacksonville, so I'm sure you're familiar with the Callaway Cove apartment explosion and fire that injured several people. And the indications were from the HUD OIG that complaints were not being properly followed up on, not handled in a timely manner, and that actually led to potentially this explosion. The two of the main recommendations that came out of the specific investigation of this incident has to do with developing a comprehensive process to ensure that complaints received by the clearinghouse are resolved in a timely manner. That's number one. That's their recommendation. Number two is develop agency-wide policies and procedures for the intake, monitoring, tracking of health and safety complaints, and follow-up on the mitigation. Some of the times when you look at mitigation, it's up to like 17 days. That's just not acceptable. So are these OIG recommendations on HUD's radar? Are you guys working on this now? And your FY25 request includes $419 million for the Information Technology Fund. Are you looking to use that to assist with developing this tracking system?
No, thank you. And so first of all, let me say that it is horrible what happened at that site, and residents' complaints should always be listened to, and it's a manager's duty to make sure that people are living in a safe building. So let me say that at the top. As it relates to the complaints, right now, HUD does have a decentralized process because we do have partners who sit between us and those owners, who are the intake system for those complaints. And we do get those reports, but they're coming from all across the country. So yes, one of our IT investments is to find a way to take all of those complaints and centralize it in a way that HUD understands, so those red flags can be raised. And that is an investment that I know our Office of Housing is looking to take on with our IT department. Separate and apart from that, last year HUD did start our new Inspire inspection program. It's the first time that the same inspection protocols for public housing, the types of sites that you're mentioning, and our voucher program, the same inspection protocol. That protocol is now focused on health and safety. The previous one was more focused on curb appeal. This one is looking inside the units, and we're hoping that when this is in it's in use right now, but when it gets really rocking and rolling, we will be able to find these problems and address them more quickly.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to working with your staff on the
Absolutely.
voucher issue.
Yeah, I'm
Thank you.
intrigued by that one.
Mr. Chairman, I see my time is up. I yield back.
Mr. Aguilar, with a full 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Acting Secretary, I'll do the very best I can in the 35 seconds that the chairman has allotted me here. Appreciate his generosity. You have big shoes to fill, as has been
Indeed.
said before.
Indeed.
Your predecessor served with many of us,
Yes.
not just in this chamber, but on this in these committee rooms. So thank you for signing up for this, and we look forward to working with you. Climate disasters, is the chairman mentioned, climate disasters, and the ranking member touched on this too, wildfires, atmospheric storms, they've threatened homeowners' insurance market as well across California. In the last year, 7 of the 12 top insurance companies in California have stopped offering homeowners insurance policies in the state, threatening millions of middle-class Californians who are seeking to renew or get their insurance policies. Within the scope of HUD's jurisdiction, what can we do together to help address the rising costs of homeowners face with respect to insurance, while also obviously being a part of the affordable housing provider mix and the insurance that is available and required of these affordable housing providers?
Yeah. I have yet to run into an apartment owner, public or private, who doesn't bring up the escalating cost of insurance as a problem in terms of being able to maintain their operations or even finding insurance. So I thank you for putting that question out there. We've sat with housing providers about ways in which HUD can use its authorities. We have very limited authorities when it comes to the insurance industry. But what we can do is look at our rules and see ways that we can meet this moment. And I think it was just last week, if not the week before, we adjusted our wind and storm coverage to really help some of those housing providers deal with some of these escalating insurance costs. We're also working inside of the public housing program to see if there's ways that we can address increased costs there. Sometimes agencies don't know that they can come to us and ask for additional funding to address some of the things that you've described. So one, we're getting information out there on what people can do, but we're also taking a really precise look at our rules to see, are we requiring folks to get levels of insurance perhaps that they might not need to. I've heard that we sometimes we require insurance on unnecessary levels of insurance on empty buildings. And so we're trying to look at common sense things like that to see how we can address those costs. It's a real issue. I've met with mission-driven private owners of affordable housing who are saying to me they can't stay in the business because they can't get insurance. But their market rate units can. So there's lots of curiosities around what's happening right now inside of the insurance industry, but HUD is working with our owners with what we can do to help.
Are there suggestions that you have to us or our friends on the authorizing side, flexibility that would be necessary in order to help? I mean, more of this is going to happen, whether it's California or Florida or Oklahoma, more of these climate disasters?
We'll provide those to you. We have a working group that has every single part of the housing portfolio inside of HUD has provided me with things that they can do. I will put on the table, are there things that Congress can help us do? And we'll make sure to get that to this committee and to the Congress.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I know you met with local leaders. A lot of us met with our local mayors this week as well, and specific to project-based vouchers. As Congress considers increasing the cap for project-based vouchers, what considerations would HUD suggest we keep in mind with respect to implementing a cap increase?
Well, one of the things that HUD is going to do from its part is finally implement the project-based aspects of HOTMA, which was a law that Congress approved many moons ago. And so we're going to get that across the line. We think it will improve the administration of the project-based program. We are right now at a 30% cap. And there's some folks who feel that project basing isn't always the best solution, but we also know that we see it working well, particularly when it's difficult for folks to find a unit with the voucher in their hands. So as we do this body of work of ways to make the voucher program better, we will come back to you with things we think we need that can help with the authorizations in that program.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you.
Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Acting Secretary. Appreciate you being here. I want to return to the topic of homelessness and, in particular, the need for policies that prioritize holistic approaches to homelessness, encompassing both housing and essential support services. Do you think it's important if a person experiencing homelessness who has untreated mental illness with self-medicating substance use disorders get treatment?
I think it's important that anybody who has mental or physical illnesses get the treatment that they need.
And you'd agree that an addict who's addicted to methamphetamine or fentanyl should get treatment as well, correct?
I believe that anybody who's having substance abuse issues should have treatment available to them.
Are you aware of the dramatic increase in overdose deaths inside federally supported Housing First programs?
I'm sure that there's an uptick.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to insert into the record an article from the American Medical Association, JAMA, titled Mortality Among People Experiencing Homelessness in San Francisco During COVID-19 Pandemic.
Without objection.
Thank you. Should a person experiencing homelessness who has untreated mental illness with self-medicating substance use disorders receive treatment before we provide them with a housing voucher?
So here's my thoughts on that. In my experience, what I've found is that if someone is stabilized in a home, not only is it easier to provide services, but it's actually easier to even find that person. When someone is homeless and on the streets and going through sort of a mental trauma, it is difficult to provide services to them. But what we can do once someone has a home or is in a shelter, we're able to provide those services.
Can you tell me what metrics HUD is using to assess the effectiveness of its programs in addressing homelessness, mental illness, and substance abuse?
Our emergency shelter program and our continuum of care have a number of different metrics that we use. I'm happy to provide those to your office.
Thank you. And can you talk about how the data informing future policy decisions, how it is informing future policy decisions and resource allocation?
One of the things that we do is we listen to the folks who have to administer our programs locally about things that we need to do to make sure the program is effective, and we do that on a routine basis.
And can you tell us how HUD is collaborating with mental health and substance abuse treatment providers to ensure that individuals experiencing homelessness have access to the support services that are needed?
Absolutely. So I mentioned before that there's sometimes a disconnect between housing and services, and one of the things we want to do is to braid those two a little bit more tightly together. We certainly do provide, our funds do provide an opportunity for services, not just housing. It can pay for services as well. I mentioned earlier that we have a new initiative with HHS to find ways to use Medicaid dollars to pair it with housing so people are getting the services that they need, whether it be some mental trauma or it is something tied to substance abuse.
Can you tell me how HUD is partnering with the faith-based community that provides housing assistance and supportive services?
Well, certainly our funds have access to those funds as well, in being sort of the part of that front line of providing folks with shelter, providing folks with interim housing, providing folks with services.
Thank you. I would just say I think we'd all agree that simply providing housing without addressing underlying issues such as mental illness or substance abuse is a recipe for failure. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Espaillat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations, Acting Secretary.
Thank you. And might I say you have a fabulous name, Adriana.
I'll never forget yours. Well, Mr. Chairman, in many ways, we've heard from both sides of the aisle on this great need that America has for housing. And it's really what we hear is really a lack of money investment. I think that maybe even from the Reagan years forward, the federal government has become an absentee landlord. We haven't provided the funding for housing that it takes for families to have a roof over their heads. And so, as appropriators, it's incumbent upon us to make this a priority. And this is not an easy issue, it's a deep pocket issue. Housing is never a cheap endeavor, right? It requires an investment, but it has a direct impact on the quality of life, obviously, of all Americans. And I heard from my colleagues from both sides really have a similar story, similar questions to you, Acting Secretary. So, and nowhere is this more profound and more visible than in the NYCHA complexes of my district and across New York City. NYCHA has 360,000 residents, and it has over 177,000 apartments. But they're in dilapidable conditions. They are really in bad conditions. New boilers are needed, chipping paint, roofs, elevators are done. The wear and tear of this housing stack has taken a toll on it, and it needs investment. In fact, the projection is that a 20-year capital investment need is for $78 billion. Now get that. I am sure it's no different in each of our districts. The housing needs are so profound. So I want to know, what plan do we have in HUD to begin to address this humongous problem?
Thank you for that, Congressman. We, as a country, we have not kept up with the needs of the public housing portfolio, as you so well stated. And, we can do better, and we need to do better for the families who live in those units. It's one of the reasons why the president, for the past 3 budgets, has proposed billions of dollars of investment for our public housing sites, to deal with heating, to deal with basic, just making sure people have an operating kitchen, to get rid of some of the health hazards we talked about earlier. We have to and we must do more. One of the things that we are doing as well is making sure that people have access to a streamlined version of the RAD, which is the only thing that many agencies, including NYCHA, is using right now to make those repairs. We are trying to make sure we're putting in our annual budget a capital fund amount that deals with it, but it really doesn't all the time.
It's a drop in the bucket, really.
But it's one of the reasons why we've proposed a $7.5 billion investment in our public housing sites, so we can begin the heavy work that you've talked about. And I think that work, married with some of the things that we're already doing, will make a difference. But we must do more.
And that's a call to this committee. This is the HUD committee, subcommittee. To make a priority out of housing again, I think is imperative for our nation on both sides of the aisle. This perhaps could be a bipartisan issue that we can work on. Finally, Acting Secretary, there's a building in my district, 1915 Billingstein Terrace in the Bronx, that collapsed. And they are the recipient of, a part of it collapsed. They are the recipient of low-income housing tax credits and have previously been deemed structurally unsound in 2020. Had the structural needs been addressed, many residents would have had to live through this without this experience, right? What can HUD do to ensure that landlords keep up their housing stock when they receive these low-income housing tax credit?
So LIHTC housing gets not one most of the time, but two inspections. There's requirements that Department of Treasury has that they're inspected every year. And then if there's any vouchers in the building, the housing agency is inspected as well. I think what I'd like to do is maybe sit down with our leadership at Treasury and say, what more can we do together to make our inspections sort of making sure that our inspections are finding these issues before these strategies occur. And I'm happy to work with you on that.
Well, I'll invite you to come and see our NYCHA developments as well.
Absolutely. I
Thank
look
you,
forward
Mr.
to
Chairman.
that.
I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Siscomani.
Thank you, Chairman. And I want to thank Acting Secretary Todd Meehan for being here today. Thank you so much. Safe and affordable housing is a key component of preserving the American dream that I often talk about. And in Southern Arizona in particular, we're facing a severe homelessness and affordable housing crisis. So this issue is a very, very high priority to me. Now, I believe that the federal government must get creative when looking at ways we can tackle this housing shortage. And that is why I called upon the administration to repurpose a small percentage of unobligated COVID-19 relief funds towards a deficit neutral multi-housing demonstration program to support the swift production of urgently needed affordable homes and leverage public resources to private investment. So I was very pleased to see the inclusion of a line item for a demo program of this nature in the budget request this year from you all. So as HUD works out the details of this demo program, is this something that you would be willing to work with me on in this project?
Certainly.
Great. Well, I look forward to work with you on that in your department of this demo program, as well as other innovative ways that we can assist our cities and towns with their housing issues. Any further comment on that you have regarding just getting creative on this, thinking outside the box? I don't think my community is the only one facing this, but certainly mine is at a very high degree in terms of homelessness and just overall the affordable housing crisis.
I think that resources and innovation and being very outcome focused is what we're going to need, and a lot of intentionality. And so a lot of innovation doesn't necessarily happen here in DC. So much of it happens, with the practitioners on the ground who have to get things done. And so we invite innovation from them and learn from them about the best ways that we can take what's happening locally and bring it to scale across the country.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that. And like I said, I was pleased to see that our inclusion was made it there in the line item on the budget. Would love to take you up on that and work with you on that. I'll move on to a second question here. The federal home loan banks have said they will be contributing $1 billion to affordable housing this year. They, along with HUD, play a key role in making housing more affordable, as we're discussing. How does HUD try to learn from and partner with federal home loan banks, affordable housing programs, and vice versa? How does that relationship work?
Yeah. So we have a strong working relationship with FHFA, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, who has oversight over the federal home loan banks. And I know that the director there has been very pointed in terms of her expectations on what the FHLBs do. And so that is our point of contact. We also work with our, like I mentioned, our housing providers who do receive sometimes gap financing to build homes from the federal home loan banks, but our primary relationship is through FHFA.
Great. So is this level of funding something that the private sector is looking for?
Oh, absolutely. I think that there's. I was in a Senate Banking Committee hearing very recently with Director Thompson, and I do think there was a line of questioning there where she put on the table some of the things that she's going to be requiring of the federal home loan banks in terms of additional resources that they're bringing to the table.
Great. Well, I look forward to working with you on that as well. I'll squeeze in one more here. Arizona 6th District, mine, which I probably represent, has a significant military presence. And our veterans are a vital part of our community. The HUD VA Supportive Housing Program has been instrumental in providing housing and supportive services to our homeless veterans. Could you elaborate a little bit on the key lessons learned from this initiative? And how can HUD build on the program's success to expand supportive services and housing options for our veterans? Additionally, what role can Congress play in ensuring the continually the continual expansion of these critical services to better serve our veterans and their families.
So what VASH has taught us is that we can make a huge change in helping people who are homeless. Through VASH alone, we've reduced veterans' homelessness by 50% over the past decade. That's a big number. It's a meaningful number. So I think that we can learn from the lessons of VASH in terms of the way in which we marry housing and services, but also the way in which departments can work together. HUD has housing in our name, but we're certainly not the only ones who can support the housing the country needs. And I think VASH is a great model of that.
Well, thank you so much, and I would encourage the department to continue to prioritize programs like this one moving forward. Our veterans have sacrificed so much for us, and none of them should go without a roof over their head.
Indeed.
So thank you so much. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Siscomani. Ms. Wexton is a valued member of this subcommittee and suffers from a health condition that requires her to communicate by extraordinary means. Fascinating technology. And at this time, I'm going to yield Ms. Wexton the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As members of the committee already know, last year I was diagnosed with progressive supranuclear palsy, or PSP. I describe it as Parkinson's on steroids and I don't recommend it. PSP makes it very difficult for me to speak, so I use an assistive app so that I can participate and you can understand me. Welcome, Acting Secretary Todman. It's great to have you here. Last year, I spoke with Secretary Fudge about the Foster in Futures program, a Virginia program that helps teens and young adults in foster care after they turn 18. I was a guardian ad litem for many years, and ensuring those resources are in place is so important as these young people transition out of foster care. HHS manages a lot of the federal work in this space, but HUD also plays an important role. Just a few weeks ago, HUD announced over $12.7 million through the Foster Youth to Independence initiative to public housing authorities to provide housing assistance to young adults as they make that transition. Can you please tell us about how the FYI program's targeted assistance has improved outcomes for this vulnerable population? And are there other ways HUD or the administration more broadly is working to invest in youth as they age out of foster care to ensure they are given the resources and tools they need to succeed?
It's wonderful to see you. I think the foster, and thank you for your leadership on this issue, and it's making a tremendous difference. I know that the work that HUD is doing to help foster youth who are aging out of the system is making a tremendous difference. I try to think of, when I was 18, 19 years old and being told, go adult, go find yourself an apartment, go figure out how to pay your rent, all the things. I mean, it's hard enough being in my 50s, much less being somebody who's 18 and being told, go into this brave new world and figure it out. So the least we can do to not just help our foster youth, but also help prevent homelessness is to catch our young adults when they need us the most and house them. And so that program has been working very, very well. And we look forward to seeing it grow. One of the things that we have been doing is making sure that two systems are working with each other, and that is the housing system and the foster care system. And so our leader inside of the public housing program has met with his counterparts at HHS to make sure that we're lockstep in getting these vouchers out the door and helping as many foster youth as we can.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Last year, I also spoke with Secretary Fudge about HUD's work to stand up new violence against women after sources, which included a public-facing website that had just gone online shortly before our hearing in 2023. She was very excited about the resources, trainings, and technical assistance that would be available for anyone who might need them, both housing providers and regular people. So, my question for you is, could you please give us an update about HUD's efforts to provide these resources, and how the funding Congress has provided for these programs has been used to support survivors and improve outcomes?
No, so we certainly have stood up our, or will be stood up this week, our new gender-based violence office. And we're certainly looking at ways in which we can staff that up very, very quickly, ma'am. In addition to that, our staff in our Fair Housing Office have been receiving sometimes very painful calls from survivors asking for HUD's help. And we've been helping them with the resources and the abilities that we have. So this is a priority for the department.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Zinke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Secretary, Acting Secretary. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
And first, I want to thank you. Your staff in Montana has been very helpful in us navigating through multiple community projects and stuff. So your staff in Montana, I can say, has been very good.
Good.
And thank you. There is an issue, though, that you don't learn much from the headquarters. You learn a lot when you go to the front line. And so Montana Housing Authority has an issue that was brought to my attention. And it's an important enough issue they came all the way to Washington, D.C. to talk to me about it. They shared with me the problem they're having, in fact, that the Montana Housing Authority has had $4.5 million swept from their reserve account. With that money taken and more planned this year, it makes the problem become to the surface, and it's a big problem. In fact, it's such a problem, the result of $4.5 million resulted in 576 Montana families that were unable to access housing assistance. And then a couple weeks ago, this same issue was brought forward to you during the Senate Banking Committee hearing. You were asked to reach out to local housing authorities in Montana to try to navigate through this. To date, nothing has been heard from your office. And I just want your commitment that you'll reach out to the Montana Housing Authority and to get their input how do we remedy this. Because sweeping that account, I'm sure everyone does it a little differently, but the reserve account in Montana, when it's swept, they can't go forward with existing contracts, so it's a problem. So if I have your commitment to work on that.
Absolutely. The sweeping of the reserves only recently came to my attention, so I'll learn more about that. And I will say it was my impression that members of the HUD team had reached out to the Montana Housing Agency to talk about their fair market rent methodology. So I will double back with them, but it's my impression that connection happened, but I will confirm.
And I just had my assurance I will work together with you to remedy it, but it needs to be
Absolutely.
remedied. And then just on philosophy, we talk about, renting vouchers, and you look at, affordable housing, and why is it so unaffordable? And in Montana, some of it, too, is that people from California are coming, and maybe California, housing prices were more. So there is some of that. But a lot of it has to do with high inflation. And high inflation and also energy costs. So when energy costs are high, material costs are high, building material costs, that dumps into labor costs, and inflation. When we have high inflation, then you have high interest rates, and we're all suffering from that. So that house that was affordable before might not be under the current interest rates. I'm particularly concerned about home ownership. And I understand helping people through a rough spot in housing, but ultimately, it's always been about home ownership. And the American dream, a lot of it is built on home ownership. And when you live a life of renting and there's no opportunity to buy home ownership, then a lot of it dissolves for many the American dream. And a lot of frustration on the younger people that look up and how do I afford a $1.2 million house in Bozeman, Montana. So some of it is, you talk about innovation. And I would offer this, I think we should look at a government-backed 50-year mortgage. Because as while you pay a lot of interest rates, I think lowering monthly costs, lowering monthly costs so people can afford something. And then I think we should look at expanding definitions of title. Because it's very difficult to get a loan sometimes on a condo. But you know what? You own the title. And maybe we should expand our definition on innovation of what title looks like so a person can buy maybe a piece of an apartment or expand it. So at least you own and gain equity on the title. Might not be the first title you own. Hopefully it's not. Maybe you can expand up. But the entry level for a lot of families on a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage is too far. So I applaud your efforts in that. I just caution that spending, I think the source of the problem is getting after inflation, lower that. Source of it is getting after lower energy costs, crush the interest rates down, and look at opportunities, how to expand the opportunity for everyone to buy a home eventually. So thank you for your thing, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We've completed our round of questions on round one. We're going to do a quick lightning round if any of the remaining members have a question that they'd like to ask, and I want to start. In January of 24, HUD's Office of the Inspector General published an urgent management alert regarding improper payments in HUD's tenant-based and project-based rental assistance programs, noted that the HUD leadership needed to take immediate action to resolve issues in estimating improper payments in those programs, the two largest at HUD. So can HUD share an estimate of its improper payments for last year for these programs? And have we made any progress in estimating improper payments for these programs since January of 24? We're hearing a lot about improper payments. I know Chairman Arrington on the House Budget Committee is trying to tackle improper payments, and there are many areas in the federal bureaucracy where improper payments are, the sum total of them are extremely, extremely high. Help me understand where we are in improper payments.
Thank you, Chairman. So, yes, the Inspector General at HUD and I have been having this conversation over the past several months, ways in which HUD can expedite its review of improper payments. It has been some years that we've done that, and I think that we were presented with a proposal that seemed like it was still too many years to go. One of the reasons is because some of the technological needs that we have to do it in an efficient way. It was a heavy cost burden to the department, sometimes eclipsing even a percentage of the improper payments that we had in our rental assistance programs. But we are going to expedite, and by the commitment that I've made to really the whole HUD family, but also the IG, is that we will have an improper payment estimate by the end of next year. Having said that, the program has improved over the years in terms of making sure that there's no improper payments to begin with. And so while perhaps 20 years ago there was an amount of improper payments that was unacceptable, with the advent of third-party verification that agencies use, some of the compliance work that we do with our privately owned sites, we've been able to have a much more stringent approach to HUD's payments so that we are keeping the public trust. And so we know that that is in place. It is our obligation to get this body an improper payment number, and we're committed to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Quigley? No further questions? Mr. Rutherford?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, the Continuum of Care program, which I am very supportive of and really appreciate all that y'all do in that. As you're aware, in Section 242 of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, we gave HUD the authority to do that 2-year issue of the NOFO. And so this is our first year going through. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that that's had with the providers?
We are enthusiastically looking to have this 2-year competition opportunity. You know, continuums of care need to be busy helping homeless people, quite frankly. And each year they're trying to balance helping homeless people with applying to HUD for more funds so they can survive the next year to help more homeless people. So these 2 years, I think, are welcomed, not just by the department, but also the COCs, and thank you for that. And we are going to be implementing it with much enthusiasm.
Very good. Has Has it increased your participation of providers? Or is it too early to tell?
It's too early to tell.
Okay.
It's too early to tell, but I can tell you it is welcomed, and we look forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mike, any final remarks?
Just thank Madam Secretary for being here and your good work. We look forward to working together with this committee. I think Chairman's right. We have a good team here who wants to get appropriations done and done on time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. With that, our time is concluded. Thank you for being here today, Madam Secretary. To my colleagues and to their staffs, anyone that has questions to submit for the record, please do so within 7 days to the subcommittee staff so that we can get those included into the record. I want to thank you for being here this morning. We look forward to working with you as we continue the FY25 appropriations process. And with that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.